The desert wind carried memories across the Arizona plains, stirring dust that had settled over 70 years of living. Cole Brennan sat on the wooden porch of his ranch house, the setting sun painting the horizon in shades of burnt orange and deep purple. His weathered hands rested on the Winchester rifle across his lap, the same rifle that had seen him through 3 wars, countless battles, and one terrible choice that had defined the rest of his life. At 105, Cole's body bore the marks of a hard existence. His face was lined like the canyons that cut through the desert, each wrinkle a story, each scar a lesson. But his eyes remained sharp, the pale blue of high-altitude ice, still capable of reading the land and the men who crossed it. Inside the house, his grandson Jack moved with the nervous energy of youth on the edge of manhood. The boy was 18, tall and lean, with his grandmother's dark hair and his grandfather's steady hands. Tomorrow morning, Jack would ship out to basic training, carrying the weight of decisions about war and duty, about following in his father's footsteps. The screen door creaked open. Jack stepped onto the porch, his duffel bag already packed and waiting by the door. He sat down on the steps, silent, staring out at the same sunset his grandfather watched. Minutes passed. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermal currents. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called away to the coming night. Finally, Jack spoke. His voice was quiet, almost lost in the wind. "Grandpa, were you scared? The first time you had to shoot someone?" Cole didn't answer immediately. He never rushed words. That was something the young needed to learn, that silence often said more than speech ever could. He let the question sit between them, feeling its weight. "Let me tell you about the time I had to choose between honor and survival," Cole said at last. His voice was gravelly, shaped by decades of sparse conversation and desert air. "It was 1878. I was 35 years old, and I'd been running for 3 years. Jack turned curiosity, overcoming anxiety. In all his years growing up on this ranch, his grandfather had rarely spoken of the past. The old man was a closed book, a locked door, a vault of secrets that only opened when the moment was exactly right. Cole closed his eyes, and the present fell away like dust from an old photograph. When he spoke again, his voice carried the cadence of memory of a story that had waited 70 years to be told. "It started 6 months before I ever met your grandmother," Cole said. "Started with blood and fire, and a little girl who lost her voice to violence. The scene shifted, time bent, and the story began. The winter moon hung full and bright over the small Apache settlement near the Mexican border. It was January 1878, and the world was still finding its shape after the chaos of war and Reconstruction. This was a time when the frontier was neither fully wild nor fully tamed, when the old ways and the new collided in violence and compromise. Sarah McKenna sat by the fire watching her husband Daniel whittle a piece of cottonwood. Their daughter Ruth, 7 years old and bright as copper pennies, was already asleep in her bedroll, dreaming the uncomplicated dreams of childhood. Daniel was half Apache, half Irish, a man caught between two worlds and comfortable in neither. But he'd found peace here in this small community of families who asked no questions about bloodlines or backgrounds. He was tall and lean, with Sarah's people's high cheekbones and his father's green eyes. 20 acres, Daniel said quietly, not looking up from his whittling. His hands moved with practiced precision, shaping the wood into a small horse for Ruth. Good land near the river. $400. We'll have enough after the fall harvest. Sarah smiled, mending a shirt by firelight. Ruth will have a school, a real school, not just what we can teach her. She's smart, Daniel said with pride. Smarter than both of us. She'll make something of herself. She will, Sarah agreed. She'll have the life we couldn't. It was a common dream on the frontier. Parents sacrificing, saving, building toward the American promise, raw and unpolished, but real enough to work for. Daniel set down his knife and the half-finished horse. He looked at Sarah with an expression of such tender contentment that she felt her heart swell. They had so little, owned almost nothing, but in that moment they had everything that mattered. I love you, he said simply. Sarah reached across the fire, took his hand. I love you too. They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped, the fire crackling between them. In the distance, the settlement was quiet. 30 people and 10 families trying to carve out existence on land that didn't want to be tamed. Then the gunfire started. The first shots came from the north edge of the settlement, sudden and sharp in the cold night air. Daniel was on his feet instantly, grabbing his Winchester Model 1873 from where it leaned against their shelter. "Bandits," he said, his voice tight but controlled. "Sarah, take Ruth. The cave. Now." Sarah didn't argue. She'd learned long ago that survival came from quick decisions and quicker action. She scooped Ruth from her bedroll. The girl woke, confused, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Mama." "Quiet, sweetheart. We have to hide." Daniel was already moving toward the gunfire, but he paused, turned back. His eyes found Sarah's in the firelight. "Whatever happens," he said, "stay hidden. Don't come out. Don't make a sound. Promise me." "I promise," Sarah said. "Ruth promised Papa." Ruth, now fully awake and frightened by the fear in her parents' voices, nodded quickly. "I promise, Papa." Daniel kissed them both fast and fierce. Then he was gone, running toward the sound of violence with his rifle ready. Sarah grabbed what she could carry and ran the opposite direction Ruth clutched against her chest. The cave was 50 yards away, a narrow opening in the rock face that they'd found weeks ago. It was barely large enough for two people to squeeze inside, but it was hidden invisible from the settlement. They made it with seconds to spare. Sarah pressed herself and Ruth deep into the darkness, one hand over her daughter's mouth, the other clutching a knife. Through the narrow opening, they could see the settlement. Chaos had erupted. Fire bloomed in 3 places. Men on horseback rode through the camp, firing indiscriminately. These weren't soldiers or lawmen. They were raiders, the kind of men who preyed on isolated settlements for horses' supplies and the simple pleasure of destruction. Sarah counted 7 riders. They were after the horses, she realized. The settlement had recently acquired a herd of 50 animals, good stock, that could be sold for serious money in Mexico. She saw Daniel take position behind a wagon. Saw him raise his rifle. The Winchester barked once, twice, 3 times. One raider fell from his horse, then another. Daniel was a crack shot trained by Apache hunters in frontier necessity. But there were too many. Sarah watched, unable to look away, unable to help. She felt Ruth trembling against her, felt her daughter's rapid heartbeat like a trapped bird. She kept her hand firm over Ruth's mouth, knowing that one sound could kill them both. Daniel was reloading when the 3rd raider came around the wagon from behind. Sarah wanted to scream to warn him, but her promise held her silent. Daniel turned too late. The raider's pistol flashed in the firelight. Daniel went down. Sarah felt Ruth's scream build against her palm, felt her daughter's whole body convulse with the need to cry out. But she held firm, pressing harder, whispering desperately in Ruth's ear. "Silent, baby, silent, like Papa said. He wanted us safe. He wanted us safe." Ruth's eyes were wide with horror, staring at the place where her father had fallen. Tears streamed down her face, but she made no sound. Sarah felt something break in her daughter, in that moment felt innocence shatter like glass. The raid lasted another 10 minutes. When it was over, 12 people were dead, including Daniel. The raiders took the horses and disappeared into the night, leaving fire and grief behind. Sarah waited in the cave until dawn, Ruth silent and shaking in her arms. When the sun finally rose and she was certain the raiders were gone, she emerged. The settlement was destroyed. The survivors, 18 people out of 30, gathered in stunned silence. They looked at the dead, at the ruins, at the empty corral where their future had been. Sarah walked to Daniel's body. He lay on his back, eyes open to the lightening sky, the Winchester still in his hands. Around him were 15 spent shell casings. She looked toward where the raiders had fled and saw 3 bodies they'd left behind. Daniel had fought to his last breath, had died protecting his family and his people, had given Ruth and Sarah the chance to survive. Sarah knelt beside him. She didn't cry, couldn't cry. Grief this deep went beyond tears, settled in the bones, and blood became part of the body's architecture. Ruth stood beside her, mother staring at her father's face. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. She tried again. Nothing. The words were gone, stolen by trauma, locked behind a wall of horror that a 7-year-old mind couldn't process. Sarah noticed, gathered her daughter close. "It's all right, baby. You don't have to talk. Mama understands." But she knew that something had changed in Ruth that night, something that might never change back. They buried Daniel in the rocky soil along with the others who had fallen. The settlement's medicine woman spoke words in Apache over the graves. The survivors stood in a circle, heads bowed, understanding that this was the end of their small community. By that afternoon, the decision had been made. The settlement couldn't survive. Too few people, too little security, too much death. Families packed what they could carry and scattered in different directions. Some went north to the reservations, some south to Mexico, some east to try their luck in the territories. Sarah was left with a choice. Daniel's Winchester still loaded with the last 5 rounds he'd never fired. A leather bag containing $127, all that remained of their savings. A bedroll, a cooking pot, a knife. And Ruth, silent and traumatized, clutching the half-finished wooden horse her father would never complete. They had no family, no tribe that would take them in without question. Sarah was half Apache, half Mexican, married to a man who was half Irish. Their daughter was a mix of bloodlines that belonged nowhere and everywhere. Sarah looked at the money in her hands, looked at her daughter, made a decision. They would walk, would survive, would find a way. That was 6 months ago. The months that followed were a blur of heat and hunger dust and desperation. Sarah and Ruth became ghosts of the frontier, drifting through the margins of civilization, never staying long enough to be noticed, never stopping long enough to be caught. Sarah taught Ruth to survive, using the skills her Apache mother had taught her. They learned to read the land to find water by watching birds and reading the growth of plants. They learned to catch small game with snares made from wire and patience. They learned to move quietly, to hide quickly, to trust their instincts about danger. Ruth learned the lessons well, but she never spoke. Communicated through gestures, through expressions, through a system of hand signals that Sarah developed. The silence became their shared language, a bond forged in loss. January became February. They walked north, avoiding towns when they could, stealing through them like shadows when they couldn't. Sarah spent money only when absolutely necessary. A loaf of bread, a canteen, ammunition for Daniel's Winchester, which she'd learned to shoot with surprising accuracy. February became March. The weather warmed slightly, but the land grew no kinder. They crossed through New Mexico territory, skirting the edges of settlements, sleeping in arroyos and under rock overhangs. Sarah kept them moving, driven by an instinct she couldn't name, searching for something she couldn't define. March became April, then May. Ruth grew thinner. Sarah watched her daughter's face lose its childish roundness, saw cheekbones emerge, saw the brightness fade from her eyes. The wooden horse her father had carved became Ruth's most precious possession. She carried it everywhere, slept with it clutched to her chest, sometimes touched it to her lips as if it could somehow bring him back. By June, they had crossed into Arizona territory. Sarah's money was nearly gone. $23 remained, enough for perhaps 2 weeks if they were careful, less if they weren't. Sarah tried to find work, knocked on doors, offered to clean, cook, mend. But a woman traveling alone with a child, a woman with Apache features and no husband, was viewed with suspicion at best, hostility at worst. Doors closed, offers were refused. Once in a small town called Prescott, someone threw stones. July arrived with brutal heat. Sarah counted her remaining money, $2.75. They had food for perhaps 3 more days. After that, starvation wasn't a possibility. It was a certainty. Sarah considered her options. She could steal, but that would likely get her hanged and Ruth sent to an orphanage where Apache blood was not welcome. She could beg, but pride was sometimes all that kept a person walking, and she couldn't afford to lose it. She could try to find her mother's people on the reservation, but the journey was 2 weeks through hostile territory and Ruth wouldn't survive it. Or she could do something desperate, something that would have seemed unthinkable 6 months ago, before the raid, before the death, before the endless walking. She could find a man, a single man, someone alone, someone decent enough not to hurt them, someone desperate or lonely or kind enough to say yes. And she could propose marriage, not for love, not for romance, but for survival, pure and simple, an honest transaction, shelter and protection in exchange for labor and loyalty. The kind of bargain that had been made on the frontier since the first wagon crossed the Mississippi. Sarah McKenna, who had loved one man with her whole heart, who had watched him die defending her, who had spent 6 months keeping her daughter alive through sheer will and desperation, made her decision. She would find a man who looked safe, and she would ask him to save them. The town of Red Creek wasn't much. 15 buildings clustered around a single dusty street, clinging to existence in the harsh Arizona landscape. It had a saloon, a general store, a sheriff's office, and a dozen homes occupied by people who were either too stubborn or too poor to live anywhere else. Sarah and Ruth approached the town from the east, staying hidden in the rocks and scrub oak that dotted the hillside. Sarah spent the morning watching, learning the rhythms of the place, identifying potential targets. She saw families, couples, groups of workers. None suitable. She needed someone alone, someone who wouldn't have a wife or sweetheart to object, someone who looked like he could protect, but wouldn't harm. Then around noon she saw him. A man rode into town on a tired Morgan horse, the kind of deep brown that looked almost black in shadow. The man sat his saddle with the easy competence of someone who'd spent more time on horseback than on foot. He was tall, lean, somewhere in his 30s, wore dusty trail clothes that had seen better days but were kept clean, carried a Colt Peacemaker on his right hip and a Winchester in his saddle scabbard. But what caught Sarah's attention was his eyes. Even from a distance, she could see the way he scanned the street, the buildings, the people. Careful but not paranoid. Aware but not aggressive. The eyes of a man who'd seen trouble and learned to spot it before it arrived. He dismounted outside the saloon, tied his horse with a simple slip knot that could be released in a second, if needed, patted the animal's neck with obvious affection, then walked inside with measured steps, his right hand never far from his gun, but never touching it. Sarah watched him through the saloon's window, saw him order whiskey, the cheapest kind based on the amount of money he laid on the bar, saw him drink alone, speaking only when spoken to, his answers brief and polite. A drunk cowboy stumbled into him, spilling beer on the man's shirt. The cowboy turned aggressive, looking for a fight. The man didn't take the bait, just cleaned his shirt, laid money on the bar, and started to leave. The cowboy grabbed his arm. The man moved so fast, Sarah almost missed it. He caught the cowboy's hand, bent the fingers back just enough to cause pain without causing damage, and spoke quietly. The cowboy's face went white. He nodded quickly and backed away. The man released him, touched the brim of his hat politely, and walked out. Sarah made her decision. This man was controlled, careful, strong but not cruel, alone but not antisocial. He was perfect. She left Ruth hidden in the rocks with strict instructions to stay put and stay silent. Then she positioned herself on the road out of town in a spot where he'd have to see her, but where she wouldn't startle him into drawing his weapon. When he rode past, she stepped into view, held up her hands to show they were empty, spoke clearly. "I need to speak with you, sir." The man's hand moved toward his gun, instinct overcoming thought. But he stopped when he saw her clearly. A woman, unarmed, thin as wire, dressed in clothes that had been patched so many times the original fabric was hard to identify. "State your business," he said. His voice was rough, shaped by disuse and desert air. "I mean no harm," Sarah said. "I only wish to talk." He studied her for a long moment. Sarah stood still, letting him look, letting him assess the threat and find none. She saw his eyes catalog her appearance, the exhaustion in her face, the desperation in her posture. "Talk then," he said. Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. This was it, the moment that would determine whether her daughter lived or died. "I am a widow," she said, keeping her voice steady through sheer force of will. "My husband was killed 6 months ago. I have a daughter, 7 years old. We have no food, no money, no family." "I'm sorry for your loss," the man said. His tone suggested he meant it. "But I don't have much to share." "I'm not asking for charity," Sarah said quickly. "What are you asking for?" Sarah took a breath, let it out, said the words that would change everything. "I'm asking you to marry me." The man's eyes widened. For the first time, he looked genuinely surprised. His hand fell away from his gun completely. He stared at her as if she'd spoken in a language he didn't understand. "Ma'am, I think the heat has gotten to you." "I'm completely serious," Sarah said. "A marriage in name only. I need shelter, protection, a chance for my daughter to survive. In exchange, I'll work. I'll cook, clean, tend land, whatever needs doing. My daughter will be no burden. We won't ask for affection or other things, just a roof, just a chance." The man shook his head slowly. "You don't know anything about me. I could be a murderer, a thief, worse." "Are you—" "No," he said, "but you have no way of knowing that." "I know enough," Sarah said. "I watched you in the saloon, saw how you avoided a fight, saw how you treated your horse, saw the way you carry yourself. You're not a man who hurts for pleasure. You can't tell that from watching someone for an hour. I can tell more than you think. The man rubbed his face with his hand, a gesture of exhaustion and confusion. This is crazy. Desperation makes people do crazy things, Sarah said quietly. He looked past her, scanning the rocks. You said you have a daughter. Where is she? Sarah hesitated, then decided on honesty. She turned and called out in Apache. Ruth emerged from the rocks, moving slowly, the wooden horse clutched in one hand. The man watched Ruth approach, saw how thin she was, how her clothes hung on her like laundry on a line, saw the fear in her eyes and the trust she showed by coming when her mother called. What's her name? He asked. Ruth, she's 7. She doesn't speak, hasn't since the night her father died. The man's jaw tightened. Something passed across his face, too quick to read, but Sarah saw it. Recognition of some kind. Shared pain. Ruth reached Sarah's side and pressed close, her eyes fixed on the man, wary but not panicked. The man looked from Ruth to Sarah and back again. For a long moment he said nothing. Sarah could see the war playing out behind his eyes, the battle between self-preservation and something else, something softer. Finally he spoke. I can't make promises. I don't stay in one place long. Trouble follows me. I've been living with trouble for 6 months, Sarah said. At least with you, I wouldn't face it alone. If I say yes, and that's a big if, there are things you need to know. I have enemies, real enemies, dangerous men who won't hesitate to hurt anyone connected to me. Are they close? Not yet, but they're looking. Sarah met his eyes. Then we'll be careful. We'll be ready. But I'd rather face danger with a chance than face starvation with certainty. The man was quiet for another long moment. His horse shifted beneath him, tired and ready to move on. The sun beat down on all of them, relentless and unforgiving. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. Where are you staying? Hope flared in Sarah's chest, bright and terrifying. Near the dry creek, under the cottonwood trees. I'll ride by tomorrow morning, he said. No promises. But I'll think on it. Sarah felt her knees go weak with relief. It wasn't yes, but it wasn't no. It was a chance. Thank you, she said. Thank you for listening. The man touched his hat brim, a gesture of respect that felt almost formal. Then he turned his horse and rode away, dust rising in his wake. Sarah watched until he disappeared from view. Then she sank down to her knees, gathering Ruth into her arms, holding her daughter as tightly as she dared. Ruth made a gesture with her hands, a question in their private language. Will he help Sarah sign back? I don't know, sweetheart, but he might. That's more than we had this morning. They walked back to their camp by the dry creek where the cottonwood trees provided shade, and the memories of Daniel seemed less heavy. Sarah built a small fire and cooked the last of their food, a thin soup made from dried beans and hope. That night, as Ruth slept curled against her side, Sarah stared up at the stars and thought about the man. She didn't even know his name, didn't know where he came from or where he was going, didn't know if he would keep his word and come back in the morning. But she'd seen his eyes, and in those pale blue depths, she'd seen something she recognized. Not kindness exactly, not even mercy, but understanding. The look of someone who knew what it meant to be desperate, to be hunted, to be alone. Maybe that would be enough. 5 miles away, Cole Brennan sat by his own fire, unable to sleep, unable to stop thinking about the woman and her silent daughter. He'd tried to ride away, had fully intended to keep going, to put distance between himself and the proposal that had hit him like a punch to the gut. But his horse had only made it 2 miles before Cole had pulled him to a stop, unable to continue. That little girl, Ruth. Something about her had struck him deep, had reached past all his careful defenses and grabbed hold of something he'd thought was dead. Cole reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small leather wallet. Inside was a photograph, old and worn, the image fading but still visible. 4 people stood in front of a photography studio. Cole, 25 and fresh from the war, his face unlined and his eyes still capable of joy. Frank Dalton beside him, arm around Cole's shoulders, both of them in their army uniforms. And in front of them, 2 boys. Tommy, 8 years old, and Billy, 6, Frank's nephews, orphaned by the war. Cole's fingers trembled as he touched the photograph. He hadn't looked at it in months, couldn't bear the memories it carried. But tonight, with Ruth's silent face still fresh in his mind, he couldn't help himself. The memories came flooding back unstoppable as a river breaking through a dam. Gettysburg, 1863. Cole was 20, serving as a sergeant under Lieutenant Frank Dalton. They had been friends before the war, had grown up in neighboring towns in Pennsylvania, had enlisted together in a fever of patriotic enthusiasm. The battle had been chaos incarnate, artillery shells turning the earth into hell, rifle fire so thick it sounded like one continuous roar, men dying in ways that would haunt Cole for the rest of his life. He'd been pinned down behind a stone wall, Confederate forces advancing from three sides. Out of ammunition, his rifle empty, his pistol jammed. This was it, he'd thought. This was where the story ended. Then Frank had appeared seemingly out of nowhere, firing his revolver with one hand while hauling Cole up with the other. They'd run through smoke and fire bullets whipping past so close Cole felt the heat of them. Frank had taken a round in the shoulder, but never slowed, never let go of Cole's arm, dragging him back to Union lines through sheer stubborn will. Later in the field hospital as a surgeon, dug the bullet from Frank's shoulder without anesthetic. While Frank bit down on a leather strap, Cole had made a promise. "I owe you my life," Cole had said. "Whatever you need, whenever you need it, I'm there. We're brothers now, blood brothers." Frank had grinned through the pain. Brothers, he'd agreed, always. They'd meant it, both of them. The kind of bond forged in fire, tested in blood, sacred, in a way that civilian friendship could never match. After the war, they'd gone to Texas together. Frank's sister had died of cholera during the war, leaving her two sons orphaned. Frank, barely 25 himself, had taken them in without hesitation. Tommy and Billy became his world, his reason for pushing through the nightmares in the pain of readjustment to civilian life. Cole had helped, had become Uncle Cole, the boys' favorite person after Frank, had taught them to read and write, to ride and shoot, to be good men in a world that didn't always reward goodness. Those were good years, hard years working ranches and freight companies and whatever jobs they could find, but good because they were together, because they were building something. Then the economy collapsed. The South was destroyed, the North didn't care, and men like Frank and Cole, veterans with no formal education and no family connections, found themselves with nothing. No work, no prospects, no future. Frank had two growing boys to feed. Cole had watched his friend grow desperate, watched the light fade from Tommy and Billy's eyes as hunger became their constant companion. When Frank first suggested robbery, Cole had refused, had argued, had pleaded, had offered every alternative he could think of. But Frank's logic had been hard to refute. The banks took our land, the government forgot us. The people who started this war got rich while we bled. Why shouldn't we take back what's ours? Cole had held out for 6 months, but watching Tommy and Billy grow thinner, watching Frank's desperation turn to despair, he'd finally broken. One job, he'd said, one bank, enough to get us started somewhere new. One job had become 5. 5 had become 10. They'd been careful, methodical. Never killed anyone, never hurt civilians. Just took money from institutions that had more than they needed and gave it to people, including themselves, who had less than they required. The Dalton gang was born, Frank as leader, Cole as his lieutenant, 6 other men, all veterans, all desperate. They became legends of a sort, the gang that never killed the robbers, who were almost gentlemen. Tommy and Billy grew up healthy and strong, educated and cared for. They idolized their Uncle Frank, and their Uncle Cole saw them as heroes, as men who did what was necessary when the world turned its back. It might have continued indefinitely. But Frank changed. Success bred ambition. Ambition bred recklessness. He wanted bigger scores, riskier jobs. He started recruiting men who weren't veterans. Men who didn't share their code. Cole had started to worry, had tried to talk to Frank to pull him back from the edge. But Frank had been intoxicated by power, by the reputation, by the thrill. The breaking point came in the spring of 1875, a stagecoach job. Frank had planned it, said it would be easy. But when they stopped the coach, Cole had seen the passengers. A woman maybe 30 years old, her daughter no more than 5, both terrified, clutching each other. Frank had wanted to eliminate the witnesses, had drawn his gun aimed at the woman. Cole had stepped between them, had put himself in the line of fire and refused to move. "We don't kill innocents," Cole had said, his own gun drawn and pointed at Frank. "That's the line we don't cross." For a terrible moment, Cole thought Frank might shoot him. Saw the calculation in his friend's eyes, the weighing of brotherhood against pragmatism. Then Frank had lowered his gun, but the look he'd given Cole had been filled with something cold and final. "You're soft, Cole. That's going to get us all killed." That night, Cole had made the hardest decision of his life. He'd ridden into the nearest town and found the U.S. Marshal's office, had offered himself as an informant in exchange for immunity for himself and protection for Tommy and Billy. The marshal, a grizzled veteran named Harrison, had been skeptical but intrigued. The Dalton gang had embarrassed every law enforcement agency in Texas. Bringing them in would be a career maker. Cole had spent 6 months living a lie, staying with the gang, gathering evidence, sending information to Harrison through dead drops and coded messages. All while watching Tommy grow from a boy into a young man of 17, all while knowing he was about to destroy the only family he had. The trap was set for an El Paso bank robbery. The marshals would be waiting. The plan was clean. Arrest everyone, no shots fired. Cole would walk away and start over somewhere else. But plans made by men rarely survive contact with reality. The robbery had gone wrong from the start. Someone had tipped off the gang, not about the trap, but about extra cash in the vault. Frank had brought more men, including Tommy, who'd begged to be allowed to prove himself. When the marshals sprang the trap, it was chaos. Gunfire erupted. Men died. Cole had tried to control it, tried to shout for everyone to stand down. He'd seen Tommy go down, seen the boy, his boy, in all but blood, take a bullet to the chest from a marshal's rifle. Had run to him, cradled him, watched the light fade from eyes that looked at him with betrayal and confusion. "Uncle Cole," Tommy had whispered. "Why?" Cole had no answer, could only hold him as he died. When the smoke cleared, 4 gang members were dead, including Tommy. 4 more were captured, including Billy, who'd been wounded but survived. Frank and 2 others had escaped. Cole had tried to see Billy in jail. The boy had been 15, technically still a minor, and the marshal had agreed to release him rather than charge him. But when Cole walked into that cell, Billy had looked at him with such hatred that Cole had physically recoiled. "You killed Tommy," Billy had said. "You killed him. You're no uncle of mine. You're nothing." Cole had tried to explain, tried to justify, tried to make the boy understand, but there was no understanding to be had. He'd betrayed the gang. Tommy was dead. That was all that mattered. And Frank had appeared outside the jail window that day, staring in at Cole with eyes full of murder and madness. "I trusted you," Frank had shouted. "You were my brother, and you killed my boy." "Frank, I tried to stop it. I tried." "You set the trap. You brought the marshals. Tommy's blood is on your hands. And I swear to God, Cole Brennan, I will make you watch everyone you love die before I kill you. You'll know the pain you gave me. I promise you that." True to his word, Frank had hunted Cole for 3 years. Every time Cole tried to settle, tried to build a life, Frank had found him. Had killed anyone Cole got close to. Had burned his attempts at peace to ash and bone. Mary Wilson, the school teacher in New Mexico. Sweet and kind, with plans to marry Cole and give him the family he had lost. Frank had shot her in her own classroom, left her body at the desk where she taught children to read. Mr. Peterson, the ranch owner in Colorado, who'd given Cole work and asked no questions. Frank had burned the ranch with Peterson inside, left a note for Cole that simply said, "This is what you deserve." For 3 years, Cole had run. Had become a ghost, avoiding his connections, avoiding people, avoiding anything that might give Frank another target. Until today. Until a desperate woman had proposing marriage to save her daughter's life. Until a silent little girl had looked at him with eyes that reminded him so much of Tommy and Billy that it physically hurt. Cole stared into his fire, the photograph still in his hands. He thought about Frank, who was out there somewhere, still hunting, still hating, still promising vengeance. Thought about Sarah and Ruth, who needed help he could provide, but probably shouldn't. Thought about the man he'd been before the betrayal, before the death, before the running. A man who'd made a promise to always be there for the people who mattered. He'd broken that promise once. Had let Tommy die because of choices Cole had made. Had destroyed a family in the name of doing what was right. Could he do it again? Could he let another woman and child starve because protecting himself was safer than protecting them? Closed his eyes. Let the question sit with him. Let the weight of it press down. When he opened his eyes again, he knew his answer. He put the photograph back in his wallet, put the wallet back in his saddlebag, stood and kicked dirt over his fire. At dawn, he would ride to the dry creek, would offer Sarah and Ruth what he could, would risk Frank's vengeance one more time. Because running forever wasn't living. It was dying by inches. And Cole Brennan had been dying for 3 years. Maybe it was time to try living again, even if it killed him. The desert night settled deep and cold around him. In the distance, a coyote howled. Cole looked up at the stars, the same stars that had watched over battlefields and betrayals over death and desperation. Tomorrow, he thought, everything changes. Tomorrow, he would make a choice that would define the rest of his life. Tomorrow, the running would stop. Dawn came to the Arizona desert with its usual stark beauty. The sky lightened from black to deep purple to pale gold, painting the landscape in shades of amber and rose. Cole Brennan had been awake for hours, sitting beside the cold ashes of his fire, watching the stars fade one by one. He hadn't slept, couldn't sleep. His mind had been too full of memories and decisions of the past weighing against an uncertain future. The photograph of Tommy and Billy lay in his saddlebag, but their faces were burned into his memory, now impossible to forget. When the sun finally cleared the eastern horizon, Cole stood stiffly, his joints protesting the night spent sitting on hard ground. He was 35, but some mornings he felt twice that age, his body remembering every wound, every hard mile, every cold night under the stars. He saddled Ranger with practiced efficiency, checking the cinch twice out of habit. The horse turned his head to look at Cole with dark, intelligent eyes, as if asking whether his rider had made a decision. "We're going to do something stupid," Cole told the horse quietly, "but I think we have to." Ranger snorted, which Cole chose to interpret as agreement. The ride to the dry creek took 30 minutes. Cole approached, carefully scanning the landscape for any sign of danger. It was automatic now, this constant vigilance, the legacy of 3 years running from Frank Dalton's vengeance. He saw the cottonwood trees first, their leaves rustling in the morning breeze. Then the small camp beneath them, barely more than a bedroll, and the remains of a fire so small it had probably given off more smoke than heat. Sarah was already awake. She stood when she saw him coming, one hand instinctively moving to Ruth, who sat nearby watching birds hop between the branches above. Cole stopped his horse 20 feet away. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The morning air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of sage and juniper. Sarah looked different in the morning light. Younger somehow, despite the lines of worry around her eyes. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple braid, and she stood with her spine straight, shoulders back, meeting his gaze without flinching. "You came back," she said finally. Her voice was steady, but Cole could hear the relief underneath. "Said I would think on it," Cole replied. "Did my thinking." And Cole dismounted, keeping his movements slow and unthreatening. Ruth watched him with those wide, solemn eyes, clutching the half-finished wooden horse her father had carved. "I have a place," Cole said, "about 40 miles west of here. 2 days' ride. It's not much. Small cabin needs work. Land's half desert, but there's water and some good soil. It's isolated. That might be good or bad depending on how you look at it." Sarah's hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained calm. "We're not afraid of work or isolation." "You should be afraid of what comes with me," Cole said. He needed her to understand, to know what she was getting into. "I told you I have enemies. I need to be honest about what that means." "Then be honest." Cole took a breath. This was the moment of truth, the place where he either committed or walked away. 3 years ago, I was a U.S. Marshal. I infiltrated a gang of outlaws. They trusted me. One of them was like a brother. When I turned them in, there was a shootout. A boy died, 17 years old. The gang leader was his uncle. He swore he'd kill everyone I ever cared about, and he's kept that promise twice now. Sarah listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, "Was what you did right?" "Turning them in, they were killers, or becoming killers. I thought I could save some of them. Instead, I got one of them killed." "That's not what I asked. Was it right?" Cole met her eyes. "Yes, they needed to be stopped, but that doesn't make the consequences easier to bear." Sarah nodded slowly. "My husband died protecting us from bandits. He could have run, saved himself. He chose to stand and fight. It was right, but it still cost him his life. I understand the weight of right choices." If this man finds you, he won't hesitate to hurt you and Ruth. You need to know that. Is he close? I don't think so. I've been careful. But he's patient. He'll keep looking. Sarah looked down at Ruth, then back at Cole. We're already dying slowly. Starvation is just as certain as a bullet, just slower and more painful. At least with you, we have a chance at something more than just surviving until we don't. Cole studied her face, looking for doubt or fear. He found determination instead, the kind of steel that couldn't be taught, only forged through suffering. There's something else you should know, Cole said. This won't be a real marriage, in name only, like you said. I'll sleep in the barn or build a separate place. You and Ruth will have the cabin. I won't ask for anything beyond what's practical. A marriage is a legal contract, Sarah said. It should benefit both parties. You provide shelter and protection. I provide labor and cooking. Ruth helps where she can. We all contribute. That's fair. And if this enemy of yours does find us, we face it together. I can shoot. I can fight. I'm not asking you to protect us while we cower. We're partners in this, or it doesn't work. Cole felt something shift in his chest. This woman wasn't looking for a savior. She was looking for an ally. The distinction mattered. All right, he said. Partners. Sarah extended her hand. Cole shook, feeling the calluses on her palm, the strength in her grip. This was a woman who'd worked hard all her life and wasn't afraid to work harder. Ruth had been watching this entire exchange in silence. Now she stood and walked over to Cole, looking up at him with those grave, assessing eyes. She made a series of hand gestures that Cole didn't understand. Sarah interpreted. She wants to know what to call you. Cole knelt down so he was at Ruth's eye level, and the girl didn't flinch or step back, which he took as a good sign. You can call me Cole, he said, or Mr. Brennan if that feels more proper. Whatever you're comfortable with. Ruth considered this, then made more gestures. She says Cole is fine, Sarah translated. She also says thank you for coming back. Cole felt a lump form in his throat. He swallowed it down. You're welcome, Ruth. I'm going to do my best by you and your mother. That's a promise. Ruth nodded solemnly as if sealing a contract. Then she did something unexpected. She reached out and touched the wooden horse in her pocket, then pointed at Cole's saddlebag. She wants to know if you have tools, Sarah said. She'd like to finish carving her horse. Her father started it before he died. Cole thought about this. I have a knife and some skill with wood. Maybe I could help if that would be all right. Ruth's face lit up, the first real expression of joy Cole had seen from her. She nodded eagerly. After we settle in, Cole said, first we need to make this legal, then we travel, then we work on horses and everything else. Sarah's eyebrows raised. Legal, marriage certificate, proper documentation. If something happens to me, you and Ruth need to have clear ownership of the land. Can't do that without legal marriage. Where do we do that? Judge in Red Creek, man named William Crawford. He's tough but fair. Doesn't care much about what other people think, which will help given the circumstances. Sarah understood immediately. A white man marrying an Apache woman would raise eyebrows at best, hostility at worst. Having a judge who didn't care about social conventions was crucial. Let's go then, she said. They packed up the small camp, which took less than 5 minutes since there was so little to pack. Ruth rode in front of Sarah on Ranger, while Cole walked alongside leading the horse. It was slower this way, but easier on the animal. The walk into Red Creek gave Cole time to prepare Sarah for what was coming. People will stare, he said. Some will say things. I need you to ignore it. I've been ignoring it for 6 months, Sarah replied. I can ignore it longer. Crawford will ask questions. He'll want to make sure you understand what you're doing. I understand perfectly. He might try to talk you out of it. He won't succeed. Cole glanced up at her. She sat straight in the saddle Ruth held securely in front of her, her face set with determination. This woman had walked across Arizona territory with a child surviving on scraps and will. A few harsh words from townspeople weren't going to break her. They reached Red Creek around mid-morning. As Cole had predicted, people stared. Conversations stopped as they passed. A woman pulled her children inside. A man spat in the dirt. Cole kept walking, eyes forward, hand never far from his gun. Not because he wanted a fight, but because he needed to project the confidence that would prevent one. Judge Crawford's office was attached to his home, a small adobe building at the end of town. Cole tied Ranger to the hitching post and helped Sarah and Ruth down. "Let me do most of the talking," Cole said quietly. "Crawford's known me for years. He'll listen to me." Sarah nodded. Cole knocked on the door. A moment later, it opened to reveal Judge William Crawford, a man of 60 with iron gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. He'd been a judge on the frontier for 30 years, had seen everything humanity had to offer, and been disappointed by most of it. He looked at Cole, then at Sarah and Ruth. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Cole Brennan," he said, "thought you'd left the territory." "Thought so too," Cole replied. Things changed. Crawford's gaze moved to Sarah. "This the change. Judge Crawford, this is Sarah McKenna and her daughter Ruth. I'd like you to marry us." Crawford was quiet for a long moment. Then he stepped back and gestured them inside. The office was small but organized, lined with law books and court records. A large desk dominated the center of the room, covered with papers and a brass lamp. Crawford moved behind the desk, sat down, gestured for them to sit across from him. Cole and Sarah sat Ruth standing between them. "Mrs. McKenna," Crawford said, his voice formal but not unkind. "Do you understand what you're doing?" "Yes, sir." "Cole Brennan is a wanted man in some territories, has enemies who would kill him given the chance. Marrying him puts you and your daughter in danger. Mr. Brennan has been honest about that. I accept the risk. You're Apache. Half Apache, half Mexican. My husband was half Apache, half Irish. This town doesn't look kindly on mixed marriages. You'll face prejudice, possibly violence. I've faced both before. I'm still standing." Crawford's lips twitched, might have been a smile. "You strike me as a practical woman, Mrs. McKenna, so I'll ask you a practical question. Why marry this man? Because my daughter and I will die without help. Mr. Brennan is offering that help in exchange for honest labor. It's a fair trade. Is it a marriage or a business arrangement? Both, the same as many marriages on the frontier." Crawford nodded slowly. He turned to Cole. "You understand you're taking responsibility for both of them." "Legal responsibility." "I do. Including the child you willing to adopt her legally." Cole hadn't expected that, but he didn't hesitate. "Yes." Crawford pulled out a form, dipped his pen in ink. "Then let's make it official." He asked the standard questions. Names, ages, previous marriages. Sarah's husband had been Daniel McKenna, died 6 months prior. No formal death certificate, but circumstances were clear. Cole had never been married, no living relatives. The ceremony itself was brief and businesslike. Crawford read from the legal statute, asked if they consented to the marriage, declared them married under the laws of Arizona Territory. $2 for the filing fee, Crawford said. Cole pulled out a silver Morgan dollar from 1878, freshly minted, in a smaller coin, placed them on the desk. Crawford filled out the certificate in careful handwriting, signed and dated it, pressed his official seal into the wax. He made a copy for his records, handed the original to Sarah. "Mrs. Brennan," he said, emphasizing the new name, "this document gives you legal claim to your husband's property. If he dies, the land becomes yours. The adoption papers for Ruth will take a few days to process, but consider her legally under Cole's protection as of now." Sarah took the certificate carefully as if it were made of glass. "Thank you, Judge." Crawford looked at Cole. "You're doing a good thing here. Don't let anyone tell you different. Appreciate that, sir." As they stood to leave, Crawford spoke again. "Cole, a word." Sarah took Ruth outside, giving them privacy. Cole waited. Crawford's expression turned serious. "Frank Dalton was spotted in Tucson last month, asking questions about you." Cole felt ice flood his veins. "How close is Tucson?" 3 days' ride. But the information was a month old when I heard it. Could be anywhere now. He say anything specific? Asked if anyone had seen you, described you accurately. Said he was looking for his old friend, wanted to reunite. Cole's jaw tightened. We both know what kind of reunion he has in mind. Watch yourself, and watch them. Crawford nodded toward the door where Sarah and Ruth waited. They're your responsibility now. I know. Do you? Because taking on a family when Frank Dalton is hunting you is either very brave or very stupid. Might be both, Cole admitted. But I'm tired of running, tired of letting fear make my decisions. Crawford studied him for a long moment. Then stand your ground, but be smart about it. Frank's patient, but he's not forgiving. I remember. Cole joined Sarah and Ruth outside. The sun was higher now, the day warming quickly. Sarah looked at him with a question in her eyes. Everything all right? Fine, just some advice from an old friend. They walked back through town past the stairs and whispers. This time Cole noticed Sarah walking with her head, high shoulders back, Ruth's hand in hers. She wasn't hiding, wasn't apologizing for existing, just moving forward with quiet dignity. At the general store, Cole bought supplies for the journey. Jerky hardtack, coffee-dried beans. A canteen for Ruth. A wool blanket. The storekeeper was Samuel Hart, a man in his 50s who'd known Cole for years. Cole, Samuel said carefully, heard you got married. News travels fast. Small town, that's your wife? It is. Samuel looked past Cole to where Sarah waited outside with Ruth. She Apache half. Problem. Samuel was quiet, then shook his head. Your business is your business. Just surprised is all. Cole paid for the supplies, added a few pieces of hard candy for Ruth. As he turned to leave, Samuel spoke again. Cole, I haven't forgotten what you did for my son. 5 years ago when he nearly drowned in the river. You jumped in, pulled him out. Any man would have done the same. But you were the one who did it. So I'm saying this as someone who owes you. Be careful. There are men looking for you. I know. If you need help, you come find me. I can't fight, I'm too old and too slow. But I can provide information. Supplies. A place to hide if it comes to that. Cole felt gratitude warm his chest. Thank you, Samuel. That means more than you know. Outside, Sarah had been watching through the window. When Cole emerged, she asked, friend of yours? Someone whose son I helped once. Good man. We'll need good men if trouble comes. We will. They left Red Creek behind, heading west into open country. The land here was harsh but beautiful, all red rock and endless sky. The temperature climbed as the day progressed, the sun beating down without mercy. Cole set a steady pace, not too fast, but not dawdling. He wanted to put distance between them and town between them, and anywhere Frank might think to look. Around midday, they stopped at a small creek to rest the horse and refill canteens. The water was cool and clear, fed by springs somewhere in the hills. Cottonwood trees provided shade. Cole built a small fire and made coffee while Sarah unpacked the jerky and hardtack. It wasn't much of a meal, but it was more than Sarah and Ruth had eaten in days. Ruth sat near the water's edge watching minnows dart through the shallows. Cole walked over and crouched beside her. Want to learn how to catch fish without a hook? He asked. Ruth looked up at him, interested. She nodded. All right, first you have to be patient. Fish are smarter than people think. They spook easy. He demonstrated standing perfectly still in the ankle-deep water. Ruth watched fascinated. After a few minutes, a fish swam close. Cole's hand shot out fast as a snake strike and came up with a struggling trout. Ruth's eyes went wide. She made excited gestures with her hands. You try, Cole said, releasing the fish back into the water. Ruth stepped into this creek, carefully mimicking Cole's stance. She stood frozen, waiting. A fish approached, and she grabbed for it, but too slow. The fish darted away. She looked disappointed, made a frustrated gesture. Takes practice, Cole said. I've been doing it since I was younger than you. Try again. Ruth tried again and again. On the 5th attempt, she managed to brush a fish with her fingers before it escaped. She looked at Cole with such pride that he couldn't help but smile. Getting closer, he said. Keep practicing. By the time we reach the ranch, you'll be catching dinner. Sarah watched this interaction from the shade, her expression unreadable. When Cole returned to the fire, she spoke quietly. You're good with her. Had practice. A long time ago. The boy who died, Cole tensed. How did you know? The way you looked when you told me about him, and the way you look at Ruth, like you're seeing someone else. Cole was quiet for a moment. His name was Tommy. He was 17 when he died. I'd known him since he was 8. Taught him to read, to ride, to shoot. He looked at me like I was a hero. He paused, pain crossing his face. Then I got him killed. You didn't pull the trigger. Might as well have. Set up the situation that led to it. Sarah poured coffee into 2 tin cups, handed one to Cole. My husband used to say that we can't control how things end, only how we live until they do. He lived protecting us, died protecting us. I grieve him every day, but I don't regret the choices he made. They were his choices. Tommy didn't choose to be in that bank. No, his uncle chose that for him. You tried to stop it. Sometimes that's all we can do. Cole sipped the bitter coffee, let her words settle. She was right intellectually, he knew that. But guilt didn't respond to logic. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching Ruth continue her fishing attempts. The girl was determined. Cole had to give her that. She'd fallen twice, gotten completely soaked, but kept trying. Tell me about your husband, Cole said. If you don't mind. Sarah's expression softened. Daniel, he was a good man, patient, kind. He could fix anything, build anything. He wanted Ruth to have a better life than we'd had. Saved every penny for that land, for that school. I'm sorry you lost him. So am I, but I'm not sorry for the years we had. He gave me Ruth, gave me love, gave me strength I didn't know I had. She looked at Cole. What about you'd ever been in love? Cole thought about Mary, the school teacher, about the brief months when he'd thought maybe he could have a normal life after all. Once didn't end well. The man hunting you, he killed her, to hurt me. Sarah's hand tightened on her cup. Then he's not just your enemy, he's mine too. Anyone who kills innocent people to make a point deserves whatever comes to them. The vehemence in her voice surprised Cole. This wasn't just sympathy. This was personal rage, the kind that came from understanding exactly what it meant to lose someone to violence. They packed up camp and continued riding. The afternoon stretched long and hot, the landscape unchanging for miles. Red rocks scattered juniper, the occasional stand of pinon pine. The sky was impossibly blue, stretching forever in all directions. Ruth dozed in the saddle, leaning against her mother. Sarah's arm held her secure, an unconscious gesture of protection that Cole noticed and filed away. This was a woman who would die before she let harm come to her child. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Cole started looking for a place to camp. He found a good spot where red rock formations created a natural shelter, protected from wind and providing defensible positions if needed. He helped Sarah and Ruth down from the horse, then set about making camp. He'd done this thousands of times, the motion's automatic. Unsaddle Ranger, brush him down, stake him where he could graze. Gather firewood, build a fire ring, set up a basic perimeter. Sarah watched for a few minutes, then started helping without being asked. She knew how to work, how to anticipate needs, how to contribute without getting in the way. Within 30 minutes, they had a solid camp established. Cole cooked dinner, simple but filling. Beans with jerky, coffee, and the hard candy he'd bought for Ruth. The girl's face lit up when he handed her a piece, her first real sweetness in months. As darkness fell, they sat around the fire. The temperature dropped quickly in the desert, the heat of day giving way to cold night. Cole added another log to the fire, watching sparks spiral up toward the emerging stars. Ruth was trying to stay awake, fighting the exhaustion that comes from a full belly and a long day. Sarah held her close, humming something soft and wordless in Apache. You should both sleep, Cole said. I'll keep watch. You need to sleep too, Sarah pointed out. I don't sleep much anyway. Habit from years on the trail. We could take turns. Not tonight. Get your rest. Tomorrow's another long day. Sarah looked like she wanted to argue, but exhaustion won out. She arranged their bedroll near the fire, settled Ruth beside her, pulled the new blanket over them both. Cole positioned himself between the fire and the open desert, his back against rock, his rifle across his lap. He'd spent countless nights like this, alone with the dark and his thoughts. But tonight felt different. Tonight he could hear the soft breathing of Sarah, and Ruth could see the gentle rise and fall of the blanket. Tonight he wasn't alone. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. Ranger shifted in his sleep, secure in his stake position. Cole thought about Frank Dalton, who was out there somewhere, still hunting, still hating. Thought about the life he was trying to build despite that threat. Thought about the promise he'd made to do his best by Sarah and Ruth. Morning came with pale light and cold air. Sarah woke first, moving quietly so as not to disturb Ruth. She found Cole exactly where he'd been all night, still awake, still watching. Did you sleep at all? She asked. Don't need much. Everyone needs sleep. I'll rest later. We should get moving. They packed camp efficiently, working together in the way of people who understood the value of not wasting time. Ruth woke slowly, rubbing sleep from her eyes, but perked up when Sarah reminded her she could practice fishing, when they stopped for lunch. The second day of riding was similar to the first. Hot sun, endless sky landscape that changed slowly from red rock to more varied terrain. They saw a herd of pronghorn in the distance, watched hawks circle overhead, startled a rattlesnake that had been sunning itself on a rock. At midday, they stopped at another creek. True to her determination, Ruth managed to catch a small fish after 20 minutes of patient waiting. She held it up triumphantly, made excited gestures with her free hand. Cole cleaned the fish and cooked it over a small fire. It was barely a mouthful each, but Ruth's pride in providing food for the group was clear on her face. "Good work," Cole said seriously. "You're learning fast." Ruth beamed. As they rested in the shade, Cole pulled out his knife and a small piece of wood. He began whittling his hands, moving with practiced skill. Ruth noticed immediately. She pulled out the half-finished horse her father had started, held it out to Cole with a question in her eyes. "Want me to finish it?" Cole asked. Ruth nodded eagerly. Cole took the small carving, examining it carefully. He could see where Daniel had started, could read the intent in the rough shape. It was meant to be a Mustang, proud and free, the kind of horse that represented everything wild about the frontier. "Your father had skill," Cole said. "This is good work. I'll do my best to honor it." He began to carve, removing tiny slivers of wood with each careful cut. Ruth sat beside him, watching intently, learning through observation. Sarah watched them both, her expression complex. This man, this stranger, who'd agreed to marry her out of some combination of decency and desperation, was completing a task her dead husband had started, was teaching her daughter skills Daniel would have taught, was filling in small ways the massive hole Daniel's death had created. After an hour, the horse was finished. Cole had shaped the mane, defined the legs, carved details into the face. He sanded it smooth with a piece of leather, then handed it back to Ruth. The girl held the finished horse with reverence, turning it over in her hands, examining every detail. Then she looked up at Cole and tears streamed down her face. She threw her arms around him, pressing her face against his chest, her whole body shaking with silent sobs. Cole froze, uncertain. He looked at Sarah helplessly. Sarah's own eyes were wet. She's saying thank you for finishing what her father started, for caring enough to do it right. Slowly, carefully, Cole put his arms around Ruth, held her while she cried, while 6 months of grief poured out of her. He looked over her head at Sarah and saw understanding there, saw shared pain and shared hope. Eventually, Ruth's tears subsided. She pulled back, wiped her face, made a series of gestures. "She says she'll keep it forever," Sarah translated, "and that you're a good man." Cole's throat was tight. "Tell her she's welcome, and tell her that her father would be proud of how strong she's been." Sarah signed to Ruth. The girl nodded solemnly, then tucked the wooden horse carefully into her pocket. They rode through the afternoon with a new ease between them. Some barrier had been crossed, some initial distance bridged. They were starting to become something more than strangers bound by convenience. As the sun touched the western horizon, Cole pointed ahead. "There, that's home." In the distance, barely visible in the fading light, was a small cabin. It sat alone in a landscape of sea and juniper, backed by low hills facing toward a spectacular sunset. It wasn't much. The roof clearly needed repair. The fence around the property was broken in places. The land was rough and only partially cultivated. But to Sarah, it looked like paradise. It looked like possibility. It looked like home. The cabin was smaller than it had looked from a distance. One room with a stone fireplace, a single window covered with oiled paper, and a dirt floor that had been packed hard by time and use. The roof sagged in the middle and daylight showed through gaps in the wooden shingles, but it had 4 walls and a door that closed. To Sarah, who had slept under stars and in caves for 6 months, it was a mansion. Cole dismounted and helped Sarah and Ruth down. The girl immediately ran to explore her silent footsteps, quick and light. Sarah stood looking at the cabin, the land around it, the hills in the distance painted purple by the setting sun. "It's not much," Cole said, suddenly aware of how rough everything looked. "I know it needs work." "It's wonderful," Sarah said simply. She turned to face him, and her eyes were bright with emotion she didn't try to hide. "Thank you, Cole, for all of this." Cole felt uncomfortable with gratitude, and especially when he felt he was getting the better end of this bargain. A woman who could work, who could cook, who brought purpose to a life that had been empty for 3 years. He was the one who should be grateful. "Let's get settled before dark," he said, changing the subject. They unloaded what little they had. Cole showed Sarah the inside of the cabin. The fireplace worked, the chimney drew well. There was a rough table and 2 chairs he'd made himself, a shelf for supplies, hooks on the wall for hanging clothes or tools. "I'll sleep in the barn," Cole said, gesturing to the structure 50 yards away. It was in better shape than the cabin actually, since he had spent more time there. "The cabin is big enough to share," Sarah said. "We can hang a blanket to divide the space." Cole hesitated. "People will talk." "People are already talking. We're married, legally. There's nothing improper about married people sharing a home." She was right, of course. And sleeping in the barn made sense for a few nights, but not for the long term. The Arizona winter could be brutal. "All right," Cole agreed, "but we do it proper. Separate sides, respect for privacy." "Of course." And they found an old blanket in the barn and strung it across the cabin using rope and nails. It created 2 distinct spaces, each with enough room for a bedroll and personal items. Ruth explored everything with wide eyes, touching the stone fireplace, looking out the window at the darkening landscape, running her hands along the rough wood walls. She seemed delighted with it all, this permanent shelter, after so many months of temporary camps. Cole built a fire in the fireplace while Sarah unpacked their supplies. The cabin began to warm, and the smell of wood smoke filled the air. It was a good smell, the smell of home and safety. For dinner, Sarah made something more substantial than trail food. She used the last of the beans, some wild onions she'd found near the creek, and strips of jerky. It wasn't fancy, but it was hot and filling. They ate at the small table, Ruth sitting on the floor nearby, still clutching her finished wooden horse. The fire crackled and popped. Outside nights settled, completely bringing stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. "Tomorrow I'll show you around the property," Cole said, "where the good water is, where the soil's best for planting, where the fence needs the most work. And I'll start making a list of supplies we'll need," Sarah said. "Seeds for a garden, tools, fabric for curtains, and proper blankets." "Money's tight," Cole warned. "I have some saved, but not much." "Then we'll be careful. Buy only what's essential." After dinner, Ruth began to nod off, exhausted from the long journey. Sarah tucked her into their bedroll on one side of the blanket divider, singing softly in Apache. The melody was beautiful and sang a lullaby from a culture that was being systematically destroyed. Cole sat by the fire, cleaning his rifle. He'd learned long ago that good maintenance was the difference between a weapon that worked when you needed it and a piece of useless metal. He broke down the Winchester, cleaned each piece, carefully oiled. The moving parts, reassembled it with practiced precision. Sarah emerged from behind the blanket, leaving Ruth sleeping. She sat in the other chair, watching Cole work. "You're very skilled with that," she observed. "Had good teachers and a lot of practice." The war, that and after, being a marshal meant knowing your weapons better than the men you were chasing. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Tell me about the boy, Tommy, if you want to." Cole's hand stilled on the rifle. He hadn't talked about Tommy to anyone in 3 years. The grief was too raw, the guilt too heavy. But sitting here in the firelight with this woman who had her own griefs to carry, he found himself wanting to speak. "He was a good kid," Cole said slowly. "Smart, funny, had his uncle's stubbornness, but also a good heart. He wanted to be like Frank, wanted to make him proud. I tried to steer him away from the outlaw life, but Frank was his hero. Nothing I said could compete with that." "How old was he when you met him?" 8, just a little boy who'd lost his parents to cholera. Frank took him and his brother in without hesitation. Loved those boys more than anything. "And you?" "I loved them too. Taught Tommy to read using an old Bible. Taught him to ride, to shoot, to track. He used to follow me around asking a million questions. Called me Uncle Cole." Pain laced his voice. "He died calling me that, asking me why I'd betrayed them." Sarah reached across the table, placed her hand over his. "You were trying to save him. I got him killed instead. His uncle got him killed by bringing him to that robbery. You were trying to stop the violence. There's a difference." Cole wanted to believe that, had been trying to believe it for 3 years. But the image of Tommy's face, confused and betrayed, as life left his eyes, haunted Cole's dreams. "Frank doesn't see it that way," Cole said. "To him, I'm the one who pulled the trigger. And in a way I did. If I hadn't set up the ambush, if I'd just let them rob the bank and get away, Then they would have robbed another bank, and another, and eventually someone would have died anyway. You chose to stop it before it got that far. That took courage. Courage, Cole repeated bitterly. Is that what we call it when a boy dies because of your choices? Yes, Sarah said firmly, because the alternative was doing nothing and watching more people die. You made the hard choice, the right choice. That it ended badly doesn't make it wrong. Cole looked at her, this woman who'd watched her own husband die, who'd spent 6 months keeping her daughter alive through impossible odds. She understood hard choices, understood that sometimes you did everything right and still lost. Your husband, Cole said. Do you think he regrets fighting those bandits if he could choose again, knowing how it would end? Sarah didn't hesitate. No, Daniel died protecting us. That was who he was. He would make the same choice every time. Even though it left you alone. Even though, because some things matter more than survival. Honor matters, love matters. Standing up to evil matters. She squeezed his hand. You stood up to evil, Cole. Yes, it cost you. But that doesn't make it less worthy. They sat in silence for a while, hands still touching across the table. The fire burned low. Outside, a coyote howled at the moon. Finally, Sarah withdrew her hand. We should sleep. Tomorrow will be a long day. It will, Cole agreed. Sarah rose and moved toward the blanket divider. At the edge of it, she paused and looked back. Cole, thank you for today, for all of this. You've given us a future. You've given me one too, Cole said quietly. I'd forgotten what it felt like to have purpose. Sarah smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. Then she disappeared behind the blanket. Cole sat by the dying fire for another hour, thinking about purpose and choices about the past and the fragile hope of a different future. Eventually, he banked the fire and settled onto his own bedroll on the other side of the cabin. For the first time in 3 years, Cole Brennan fell asleep without his gun in his hand. The next weeks established a rhythm. They woke with the sun, worked through the day, slept when darkness fell. It was simple living, but there was satisfaction in it. Cole showed Sarah the land, all 160 acres of it. 40 acres were usable for farming, the rest was too rocky or too dry. But 40 acres was enough to build a life on if you worked it right. They repaired the fence together while showing Ruth how to dig post holes, how to stretch wire tight, how to make corners that would hold against pressure. The girl learned quickly, her small hands surprisingly strong. Sarah started a garden near the cabin where the soil was best. She planted seeds they'd bought in Red Creek vegetables that would grow in the harsh Arizona climate. Beans, squash, corn, the traditional crops of her mother's people adapted to frontier life. In the evenings, Cole taught Ruth other skills. How to maintain a fire, how to sharpen a knife, how to read the weather by watching clouds and wind. He carved her a small knife from a piece of steel, fitting it with a wooden handle he shaped to fit her hand. Sarah watched these lessons with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper. This man, this stranger turned husband, was teaching her daughter to survive, was giving Ruth the tools she'd need in a world that wouldn't be kind to a half Apache girl. 3 weeks after they'd arrived, Cole decided it was time to make another trip to Red Creek. They needed more supplies, and he wanted to check if there had been any news. Any sign of Frank Dalton. They rode in together, the three of them on Ranger. The horse was getting used to carrying multiple riders, and Ruth had become comfortable in the saddle. Red Creek looked the same as before. Same dusty street, same buildings, same people going about their business. But this time, when Cole, Sarah, and Ruth rode in, the stares were longer, the whispers louder. Cole tied Ranger outside Samuel Hart's general store. Let me go in first, he said to Sarah. See how the wind's blowing. But Sarah shook her head. We're married. We go together. Ruth, too. Cole wanted to argue, wanted to protect them from the hostility he could already feel building in the air. But Sarah's expression made it clear this wasn't negotiable. They walked into the store together. Samuel Hart was behind the counter, weighing out flour for another customer. He looked up when they entered, his expression careful and neutral. The other customer, a woman Cole didn't recognize, took one look at Sarah and Ruth and made a sound of disgust. She gathered her purchases and hurried out without another word. Samuel watched her go, then turned to Cole. Cole, Mrs. Brennan, what can I do for you? Need supplies, Cole said, pulling out his list. Flour, salt, sugar, some fabric if you have it, seeds for more planting. Samuel read the list, nodding. I can get most of this. The fabric I'll have to check in back. He disappeared into the storeroom, leaving them alone in the shop. Through the window, Cole could see people gathering outside looking in. Word was spreading quickly. Ruth pressed close to Sarah, sensing the hostility even if she didn't fully understand it. Sarah put a protective arm around her daughter, her face calm, but her eyes watchful. Samuel returned with the fabric. "This is what I have. Good sturdy cotton. Fair price." As he wrapped their purchases, the door opened. A woman entered, someone Cole recognized as one of the town's more prominent citizens. Margaret Preston, wife of the largest landowner in the area. She was in her mid-40s, dressed well, and carried herself with the authority of someone used to being listened to. She looked at Sarah and Ruth with open disapproval. "Samuel," she said, ignoring Cole completely, "I need to speak with you about the church social." "In a moment, Mrs. Preston. I'm helping customers." "Customers," she repeated, investing the word with contempt. She turned to face Cole directly. "Cole Brennan, I heard you'd taken a wife, an Apache wife." "Yes, ma'am," Cole said evenly. "Have you no shame, no sense of propriety? That woman is barely civilized, and you bring her into town as if she belongs here." Before Cole could respond, Sarah stepped forward. She moved with quiet dignity, her head high, her eyes meeting Margaret Preston's without flinching. "Mrs. Preston," Sarah said, her voice clear and firm. "I am Sarah Brennan. This is my daughter, Ruth. We are married lawfully, and we have as much right to be in this town as anyone else." Margaret's face flushed. "You dare speak to me that way?" "I dare to speak to anyone who insults my family." "Your family," Margaret scoffed. "A white man and a savage. That's not a family, it's an abomination." The words hung in the air like poison. Cole felt rage build in his chest, but before he could speak, Ruth did something extraordinary. The girl stepped out from behind her mother and walked right up to Margaret Preston. She pulled the wooden horse from her pocket and held it up for the woman to see. Margaret looked confused. "What is that supposed to mean?" Ruth made a series of hand gestures, clear and deliberate. Sarah translated, her voice tight with emotion. "She says her father carved this horse before he died, protecting her and me from bandits. She says a good man finished it for her because he understood what it meant to honor someone's memory. She says you can judge her mother all you want, but she knows what goodness looks like, and it's not in your words." Margaret stared at the child, at the wooden horse, at the quiet defiance in Ruth's eyes. For a moment, something flickered across her face. Shame, perhaps, or recognition of her own cruelty. Then she turned and walked out without another word. The tension in the store was thick enough to cut. Samuel cleared his throat. "I'm sorry about that, Mrs. Brennan. Margaret Preston is, well, she's set in her ways." "Her ways are cruel," Sarah said quietly, "but we've faced cruelty before. We'll survive it again." Cole paid for the supplies and they loaded everything onto Ranger. As they prepared to leave, Samuel stepped outside with them. Cole a word, Sarah took Ruth and the supplies back to the horse. Samuel lowered his voice. "There's been talk. Some men came through last week, asking questions about you, described you perfectly, said they were old friends looking to reconnect." Ice flooded Cole's veins. "How many men?" "The man I talked to said 8 in his group. Their leader had a scar across his face." "Frank Dalton. It had to be." "Where are they now?" "Don't know. They left heading south. But Cole, they know you're in the area. It's only a matter of time before they find the ranch." Cole's mind raced. He'd hoped for more time, hoped Frank had given up or moved on to easier prey, but he should have known better. Frank Dalton never gave up. "Thanks for the warning, Samuel. You need help, you let me know. I meant what I said about owing you." Cole rejoined Sarah and Ruth. They rode out of town in silence, but Sarah could sense the change in Cole's demeanor, the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes constantly scanned the landscape. "What did Samuel say?" she asked once they were clear of town. Cole debated lying, protecting her from the truth, but she deserved to know what was coming. "Frank Dalton's gang was here. Last week. Sounded about me." Sarah's arm tightened around Ruth. "How close?" "Close enough. Samuel said they headed south, but that doesn't mean much. They could be anywhere." "What do? We prepare, make the ranch defensible, stock up on ammunition. Be ready." Sarah nodded, her face set with determination. "Then we prepare." That night, after Ruth was asleep, Cole and Sarah sat at the table making plans. Cole sketched out the ranch marking, good defensive positions, potential approach routes, places to set warning signals. The cabin's too exposed, Cole said. If they come in force, we can't hold it. What about the root cellar? Sarah suggested. It's partially underground stone walls. We could hide Ruth there if it comes to fighting. Good thinking. We'll stock it with water and food. Make sure she can stay hidden for days if needed. They worked late into the night planning for a siege they hoped wouldn't come, but knew was inevitable. Frank Dalton had found Cole's trail. The only question now was when he would strike. The answer came 3 days later. Cole was out riding the fence line, checking for breaks and weaknesses. It was mid-afternoon, the sun hot and high. He'd just finished repairing a section of wire when he noticed tracks. Fresh tracks. Made within the last few hours. 2 riders, maybe 3, had approached from the east, circled the property at a distance, then ridden away. They'd been careful staying far enough out that they wouldn't be easily spotted. But they'd been watching, scouting. Cole followed the tracks to the edge of his property line, then stopped. Going further would be foolish. But he didn't need to follow them to know what they meant. Frank had found him. He rode back to the cabin fast. Sarah was in the garden, Ruth helping her weed between the rows of sprouting vegetables. They looked up when Cole approached at a gallop. Inside, Cole said. Now. Sarah heard the urgency in his voice and didn't question. She grabbed Ruth's hand and ran for the cabin. Cole followed leading Ranger into the barn and quickly unsaddling him. Inside, Sarah stood by the window, Ruth behind her. What did you see? Tracks, 2, maybe 3 riders. They circled the ranch, then left. They know where we are now. Sarah's face went pale, but her voice remained steady. How long do we have? I don't know. Could be days, could be hours. Frank likes to plan to make people wait and worry, but he might also strike fast, catch us off guard. What do we do? Cole moved to his gun cabinet, began loading weapons. We get Ruth to safety. You and I prepare to defend. Ruth, understanding that something serious was happening, made urgent hand gestures. Sarah knelt beside her daughter. Sweetheart, remember the root cellar we prepared. You need to go there now. Stay quiet, stay hidden no matter what you hear. Ruth shook her head violently, gesturing frantically. She didn't want to leave her mother. Ruth, Cole said, crouching down beside her, this is important. Your mother and I can fight better if we know you're safe. You're not running away, you're being our ace in the hole. Our secret weapon. Can you do that? Ruth looked between Cole and Sarah, tears streaming down her face. Finally, she nodded. Sarah led her to the root cellar, a partially underground room, accessed through a trap door in the cabin floor. They'd stocked it with water, food, blankets, and a lantern. It was dark and cramped, but safe. I love you, baby, Sarah said, hugging Ruth tight. Stay quiet. If we call for you, you come up. Otherwise, you stay hidden until it's safe. Ruth clutched her wooden horse, nodded one more time, then descended into the darkness. Sarah closed the trap door and covered it with a rug. When she stood, Cole saw that her face was streaked with tears, but her hands were steady. What now? Now we wait and watch. They didn't have to wait long. As the sun touched the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of blood, and fire riders appeared. 8 of them silhouetted against the dying light, approaching slowly and deliberately. Cole and Sarah stood on the cabin porch, both armed. Cole held his Winchester, Sarah had Daniel's rifle. They'd positioned themselves with the cabin at their backs, giving them cover if they needed to retreat. The riders stopped 50 yards out. The leader, riding a big black horse, was clearly visible, even in the fading light. The scar across his face caught the last rays of sun. Frank Dalton. Cole's chest tightened. 3 years. 3 years since he'd seen the man who'd been his brother, his friend, his greatest mistake. Frank looked older. The scar was new, probably from one of the fights he'd been in since going fully outlaw. But his eyes were the same. Pale gray, cold as winter ice, filled with hate that had been nursed and fed for 3 long years. Cole Brennan, Frank's voice carried across the open ground. Been a long time. Cole stepped forward slightly, putting himself between Frank and Sarah. Frank, you going to introduce me to your new family? This doesn't concern them, your quarrels with me. Frank laughed, a sound without humor. Everything about you concerns me, Cole. You took my family, I take yours. That was always the deal. Sarah stepped up beside Cole, refusing to be protected. Frank's eyes fixed on her, assessing. Apache woman, he said. Cole always did have unusual taste. Pretty, though. Be a shame when she's dead. Touch her and you die where you stand, Cole said, his voice flat and deadly. Big words from a man who's outnumbered and outgunned. Maybe, but I promise you, Frank, if shooting starts, you're the first one to drop. We can test that theory if you want. Frank studied Cole, measuring his resolve. After a moment, he smiled. Not today, old friend. Today, I'm just delivering a message. What message? You got 3 days. 3 days to think about what you did, to remember Tommy's face when he died, to imagine this pretty woman and whatever child you're hiding dying the same way. Cole's jaw clenched. Frank knew about Ruth. Of course he did. He'd done his research. After 3 days, Frank continued, I'm coming back, and we're settling this. You can come with me, face the gang's justice, and maybe I let the woman and child live. Or you can refuse and I kill everyone and everything you care about while you watch. Your choice. I'm not going anywhere, Cole said. Then they die. But that's on you, same as Tommy's death was on you. You always were good at getting people killed, Cole. Sarah raised her rifle, sighted down the barrel at Frank. You can leave now, while you still can. Frank's men shifted, hands moving toward the weapons. The tension coiled tight enough to snap. Frank held up a hand, stopping his men. Easy, boys. The lady's got spirit. He looked at Sarah. You know what you married, ma'am? You know how many good men died because of him? I know he stopped criminals, Sarah said evenly. I know he did his duty, and I know that makes him a better man than you'll ever be. Frank's smile faded. We'll see about that. 3 days, Cole. Make your peace. He wheeled his horse and rode away, his gang following. They disappeared into the gathering darkness, leaving only dust and the promise of violence. Cole and Sarah stood motionless until the riders were completely gone. Then Cole lowered his rifle, his hands shaking slightly. He won't wait 3 days, Cole said. That's not Frank's style. He'll come sooner, try to catch us unprepared. Then we stay prepared. They went inside, opened the root cellar. Ruth emerged pale and terrified. Sarah gathered her close, whispering comfort in Apache. That night, none of them slept. They took turns on watch, expecting an attack that didn't come. The waiting was its own kind of torture, knowing Frank was out there planning, preparing to destroy everything Cole had tried to build. Morning came with leaden skies. A storm was building, the kind of massive weather system that could turn the desert into a temporary sea. Storm coming, Sarah observed, looking at the dark clouds gathering in the west. Big one, Cole agreed. We need to secure everything. Could get bad. They spent the morning preparing, bringing tools inside, reinforcing the barn door, checking that the cabin roof could handle heavy rain. The wind picked up as they worked, gusting hard enough to steal breath. By afternoon, the storm hit in full force. Rain came in sheets, driven horizontal by wind that howled like a living thing. Thunder crashed overhead so loud it shook the cabin's walls. Lightning turned the world white, then plunged it back into darkness. Cole was on the roof trying to repair a section that had started leaking. Sarah was inside moving buckets to catch the drips. Ruth huddled in a corner, hands over her ears, eyes wide with fear. The wind tore at the shingles, threatening to rip the whole roof away. Cole hammered desperately, trying to secure the section before it failed completely. Then disaster struck. A massive gust hit like a physical blow. Cole felt his feet slip on the wet wood. He scrabbled for purchase, fingers finding nothing but rain-slick surface. He slid toward the edge, momentum carrying him over. His hand shot out, caught the rain gutter. It bent under his weight, but held. Cole hung there 30 feet above the ground, rain hammering him, wind trying to tear him loose. Sarah, he shouted, but the storm swallowed his voice. Inside the cabin, Sarah heard the crash. Looked up and saw rain pouring through a new hole in the roof. Realized Cole wasn't making any more noise. She ran outside into the maelstrom, found Cole hanging from the gutter, his grip weakening, his face white with strain. Sarah didn't hesitate. She grabbed a rope from the barn, ran back to the cabin. The wind nearly knocked her down twice, but she pushed through it. She tied the rope around her waist, then threw the other end to Cole. Grab it. Cole caught the rope with his free hand. Sarah braced herself against the cabin wall and pulled. Cole's weight was enormous, and the wet rope burned her hands, but she'd spent 6 months surviving the impossible. She wasn't going to lose him now. Inch by inch, she pulled Cole up. He got his feet against the wall, took some of the weight off the rope. Together, they fought gravity and storm until he reached the roof's edge and scrambled over. They both collapsed on the roof, gasping, soaked to the bone. Lightning illuminated them in stark relief against the dark sky. "You saved my life," Cole shouted over the storm. "We're even now," Sarah shouted back. They crawled to the hole in the roof, dropped through into the cabin. Ruth ran to them, threw her arms around both of them, her whole body shaking. The storm raged for another 3 hours. They huddled together, wrapped in blankets, waiting for the fury to pass. When it finally did, as the sun set in a sky suddenly clear and clean, they emerged to survey the damage. The barn had lost part of its roof. The fence was down in a dozen places. The garden was flooded. But the cabin had held, and they were alive. They stood together in the mud, exhausted but unhurt, looking at the work that would need to be done. "We'll rebuild," Sarah said. "Tomorrow." "Tomorrow," Cole agreed. That night, as Ruth slept and they sat by the fire drying out, Sarah spoke quietly. "I meant what I said out there. We're even. You gave us a home. I helped save your life. Partners, like we agreed." Cole looked at her, this woman who'd run into a storm to save him, who'd pulled him back from death with strength that shouldn't have been possible. "Partners," he agreed. But they both knew it had become more than that. Somewhere between the proposal in the desert and the storm on the roof, they'd stopped being strangers. Had become something else. Something neither of them had expected. Something worth fighting for. The next morning brought a visitor. Deputy James Miller rode up to the ranch, his young face serious. He dismounted and approached the porch where Cole stood. "Cole, I need to warn you. Frank Dalton's gang was in town yesterday. They're camped 5 miles south. I'm not supposed to tell you this, but they're planning to come for you." "I know," Cole said. "Frank already paid me a visit. Gave me 3 days." Miller looked relieved that Cole knew, then worried again. "Sheriff won't move against them. Says it's outside his jurisdiction, says he doesn't have enough men." "He's scared. Can't blame him." "Maybe not, but I didn't become a deputy to hide when things got hard." Miller met Cole's eyes. "I want to help, if you'll have me." Cole was surprised. "Kid, this isn't your fight. You could get killed." "It is my fight. Dalton's gang has terrorized this territory long enough. Someone needs to stand against them. You stood against them once. You can do it again. I'm one man, with a woman and child to protect. You're more than that. You're the man who put principle over friendship, who did what was right even when it cost him everything. That kind of man deserves support." Before Cole could respond, more riders appeared. Samuel Hart riding a horse that looked barely capable of supporting his weight. Behind him, 3 other townsmen, all armed. They dismounted, approached the porch. "Samuel," Cole said, confused. "Heard about Frank's ultimatum," Samuel said. "Thought you might need some help." "You can't fight. You said so yourself." "I said I was too old and too slow to fight well. Didn't say I couldn't fight at all." Samuel gestured to the other men. "These are good men, not fighters but decent folks who are tired of living in fear." One of them stepped forward, a man in his 40s named Robert Chen. "My family came here from China 20 years ago. We've faced prejudice, threats, violence. But we've survived because good people stood up when it mattered. You stood up. Now we stand with you." Cole felt emotion tighten his throat. He'd been alone for so long, had believed that was his fate. But here were people willing to risk their lives for him. "I don't want anyone to die for me," Cole said. "Then we'll make sure no one does," Miller said. "We fight smart, we fight together, and we send Frank Dalton and his gang running." Sarah stepped out onto the porch, Ruth beside her. She looked at the gathered men, then at Cole. "Seems we have allies," she said. "Seems we do." The rest of that day was spent preparing. They fortified the ranch, creating defensive positions, setting up warning signals, organizing overlapping fields of fire. Miller, despite his youth, had tactical knowledge that proved valuable. They set up positions in the barn loft behind the stone well in the cabin itself. Created fallback points if the first line was breached. Margaret Preston arrived late in the afternoon riding alone. She dismounted and approached Sarah directly. "Mrs. Brennan, I owe you an apology." Sarah looked at her warily. "For which incident specifically?" Margaret flinched. "All of them. I was cruel, unjust. I let my prejudices speak instead of my better judgment." "Why the change of heart?" "Your daughter. The way she stood up to me with that wooden horse. She has more courage than I've shown in years." Margaret paused. "And I heard what you're facing. Heard that men are willing to fight for you. That says more about your character than the color of your skin ever could. Sarah studied her for a long moment. What do you want? To help. I can't fight, but I can provide medical supplies. Bandages, medicines, clean water. If there's wounded, they'll need care. Sarah wanted to refuse out of pride, but pride was a luxury they couldn't afford. We accept, Sarah said, and thank you. Margaret nodded. I was wrong about you, about your family. I hope I live long enough to make it right. By evening, they had 7 adults ready to defend the ranch. Not many against Frank's 8, but more than Cole had dared hope for. They ate dinner together, this makeshift family of defenders. Ruth moved among them, no longer afraid, serving food and water with quiet efficiency. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of red that looked like warnings, they took their positions and waited. Frank came at midnight. The attack started with fire. Burning arrows shot into the barn, trying to flush them out or destroy their cover. But they'd soaked the building with water, prepared for exactly this. Then came the shooting, muzzle flashes in the darkness, bullets slamming into wood and stone. The defenders returned fire, carefully conserving ammunition. Cole was in the barn loft, Sarah beside him. They worked as a team, Cole calling targets, Sarah taking the shots. Her aim was extraordinary, honed by months of hunting for survival. Miller held the position by the well, his rifle barking steadily. Samuel and the townsmen defended the cabin, their inexperience offset by determination. The battle raged for an hour. Then suddenly the shooting stopped. Frank's voice called out from the darkness. Cole, let's end this, you and me one-on-one. Winner takes all. Cole considered it, considered walking out there, settling this like men instead of soldiers. But he knew Frank too well. This was a trap. No deal, Frank, Cole shouted back. You want me? Come get me. Then your woman dies, right now. A gunshot, a scream from the cabin. Cole's heart stopped. Sarah. But Sarah was beside him, unhurt. The scream had been Margaret Preston. They ran to the cabin, found Margaret on the floor holding her arm. A bullet had grazed her, not serious, but bleeding. Ruth was kneeling beside her, eyes wide with horror. She'd come up from the root cellar when she heard the scream. Suddenly, glass shattered. A man crashed through the window, one of Frank's gang knife in hand, going for Ruth. Cole raised his rifle but couldn't fire without risking hitting Ruth. The man grabbed Ruth, put the knife to her throat. Drop your weapons or she dies. Ruth's eyes found Cole's, and something happened. The fear in her eyes transformed into rage. Pure, burning rage. The rage of a child who'd watched her father die, who'd been silent for 6 months, who'd been forced to hide while the people she loved fought for their lives. She opened her mouth and screamed. Not words, just a sound raw and primal, the voice that had been locked away since that terrible night finally breaking free. The man was so surprised he loosened his grip. Ruth bit down on his hand hard. He yelled, "Drop the knife." Sarah was there instantly, swinging the rifle butt into his face. He went down hard. Ruth kept screaming, 6 months of silence pouring out in a flood of sound. She screamed for her father, for the lost months, for the fear and hunger and pain, and then finally words. Mama, Mama, I'm scared. Sarah dropped to her knees, gathered Ruth into her arms. I know, baby, I know, but you're so brave. So brave. Cole grabbed the unconscious gang member, zip-tied his hands with rope. Then he realized what Ruth's scream had given them. A distraction. Everyone out, Cole shouted. Surround them while they're confused. They poured out of the cabin, taking advantage of the chaos Ruth's scream had created. Frank's gang, expecting silence, was thrown off balance by the sudden noise. The defenders spread out, creating a perimeter. And for the first time, Frank's gang was the one surrounded. Frank, Cole called into the darkness. It's over. Throw down your weapons. A long pause. Then Frank stepped into the light cast by the burning arrows, his gun holstered, hands visible. Just you and me, Cole, Frank called, like it should have been from the start. Cole walked out to meet him, stopping 20 feet away. They faced each other, these two men who'd been brothers, who'd saved each other's lives, who'd been destroyed by betrayal and death. You killed Tommy, Frank said, his voice breaking. He was 17, just a boy. I know, Cole said, and I'm sorry. I've been sorry every day for 3 years. Sorry doesn't bring him back. No, it doesn't. Nothing brings him back. But Frank, he didn't have to be there. You brought him to that robbery. You made him part of the gang. I was teaching him to survive. You were teaching him to steal, to break the law. And when I tried to stop it, he died. Not because I wanted him dead, but because you refused to listen. Frank's hand moved toward his gun. I should kill you right now. Maybe you should, Cole said quietly. Maybe that would end this. But then what? You kill me, my friends kill you. More death, more grief. When does that stop, Frank? When have enough people died? Frank's hand trembled. You took everything from me. And you took everything from me. We're even, drowning in blood and grief, both of us. But it doesn't have to continue. You expect me to forgive you. No, I don't deserve forgiveness. But I'm asking you to let it go, to walk away, to find something to live for instead of die for. Frank looked past Cole to where Ruth stood with Sarah, the girl who'd finally found her voice through terror and courage. That girl, Frank said. She yours. She's my daughter now, yes. She's got spirit, more than most grown men. She does. Frank was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. I can't forgive you, Cole. I won't. What you did, what it cost me, I'll carry that forever. I know. But I'm tired. God, I'm so tired of hating. It's eating me alive, and I've got nothing to show for it but 3 years of running and killing. Then stop, Cole said gently. Put down the hate. Find something else. Frank looked at him with eyes that held infinite sadness. I don't know how. Start by walking away. Today, now, leave this behind. Find a new path. For a terrible moment, Cole thought Frank would draw anyway. Thought 3 years of hatred couldn't be undone with words. Then Frank's hand moved away from his gun. He nodded slowly. I'm leaving the territory, Frank said. Going to California. Here they need ranch hands out there. Men who don't ask too many questions. That's good, Cole said. That's real good, Frank. But Cole, I want you to know something. I won't forgive you. Ever. What you did turning us in, it was a betrayal. And Tommy's death, that's on both of us. You for setting the trap, me for walking into it. I can live with that truth. Can you really? Cole thought about Tommy's face, about the 3 years of running, about the woman and child who'd given him a reason to stop. I have to, Cole said. Same as you have to find a way to live with your grief. We both carry ghosts, Frank. Question is whether we let them destroy us or teach us. Frank studied him for a long moment. Then he held out his hand. Cole took it. They shook not as friends, but as two men acknowledging shared pain and choosing to step away from the abyss. Goodbye, Cole, Frank said. I hope you build something good here, I really do. Goodbye, Frank. I hope you find peace. Frank whistled to his gang. They emerged from the darkness, mounted their horses. Frank looked back one last time, then rode away into the night. The defenders watched them go in stunned silence. When they were finally gone, a cheer went up. They'd survived. They'd won without losing anyone. Ruth tugged on Cole's sleeve. When he looked down, she spoke. Her voice was rusty from disuse but clear. Did we win, Cole? Cole knelt down, pulled her into a hug. Yeah, sweetheart, we won. Good, Ruth said. I was scared, but Mama says scared is okay if you keep going anyway. Your mama's a smart woman. Ruth hugged him tight. You're my papa now, right? That's what Mama said. Cole felt tears sting his eyes. If that's all right with you. It's all right, Ruth said seriously. You finished my horse. You teach me stuff, and you make Mama smile. That's what papas do. Sarah joined them, wrapped her arms around both of them. The three of them stood there in the mud and the aftermath, a family forged from desperation and sealed by courage. The next months were healing. They rebuilt what the storm and battle had damaged. The garden grew, providing food. The fence was repaired, stronger than before. Ruth's voice grew stronger too, though she still preferred silence, sometimes comfortable in the language she'd developed with Sarah. But she spoke when it mattered and laughed often, the sound like music. The town gradually accepted them. Margaret Preston became a regular visitor, bringing supplies and friendship. Samuel Hart extended credit when money was tight. Deputy Miller, promoted to sheriff after the old man retired, made sure they were protected under the law. Cole and Sarah's marriage remained one of partnership and respect, but slowly, carefully, it became something more. Affection grew into love, though neither spoke of it directly. Some things were better shown than said. 6 months after the confrontation with Frank, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. She told Cole one evening as they sat on the porch watching Ruth play in the yard. "We're going to have a baby," she said simply. Cole felt joy flood through him, followed quickly by terror. A baby? Really, really. I don't know how to be a father. You're already Ruth's father. You'll learn the rest. And he did. When Daniel Cole Brennan was born in the spring of 1879, Cole held his son with shaking hands and swore to be better than his past to build a legacy worth leaving. Ruth adored her baby brother, helped Sarah care for him, sang him Apache lullabies their grandmother had taught her. The ranch prospered. They added chickens, then a cow, then more land. Cole taught Ruth and eventually young Daniel everything he knew: how to work the land, how to shoot, how to survive, but also how to read, how to think, how to choose what's right over what's easy. Years passed. Ruth grew into a strong young woman, married a good man from Red Creek, gave Cole and Sarah grandchildren. Daniel grew tall and capable, took over the ranch when Cole's joints finally protested too much labor. And on the porch of the ranch he'd built from dust and determination, Cole Brennan sat with his grandson Jack, telling the story that had defined his life. "So you see," Cole said, his weathered voice still strong despite his age, "I made hard choices, lost people I loved, carried guilt and grief, but I didn't let it destroy me. Your grandmother saved me from that, gave me a reason to stand and fight instead of run and hide." Jack, 18 and facing his own uncertain future, listened with new understanding. "And Frank Dalton, did you ever hear from him again?" "Once," Cole said, 10 years later. Got a letter from California. He'd married, had a ranch of his own. Said he still couldn't forgive me, but he'd found a way to live with it. That was enough." "Do you still think about Tommy?" "Every day," Cole admitted. "Some ghosts never leave, but I've learned to live with them, to let them teach me instead of haunt me." Jack was quiet for a moment, processing. Then he asked the question he'd been too afraid to voice before. "Grandpa, were you scared when you had to make the hardest choice of your life?" Cole looked at his grandson, saw himself at that age, saw the fear and bravery mixed in equal measure. "Terrified," Cole said honestly, "but I'm also proud. You're doing what you believe is right. That takes courage. What if I make mistakes? What if I get someone killed like you did?" Cole took a deep breath. "Then you live with it. You learn from it. You don't let it define you, but you don't forget it either. Mistakes are how we grow, as long as we're brave enough to face them." "I'll try. That's all any of us can do." Cole reached out, gripped Jack's shoulder. "You're a good man, Jack. You come from good people. Your grandmother was the strongest person I ever met. Your mother has her strength. You have it too." "I hope so. I know so." They sat in silence as the sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in the same reds and golds that had colored every important moment of Cole's life. Inside the house, Sarah moved about preparing dinner, her hair white now, but her spirit as strong as the day she'd proposed to a stranger in the desert. Ruth's children, Cole's grandchildren, played in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Daniel worked in the barn, maintaining the legacy his father had built. And Cole Brennan, who'd once been a man running from his past, sat surrounded by the future he'd helped create. A future built on hard choices, harder work, and the understanding that redemption wasn't about erasing mistakes. It was about learning from them, growing beyond them, building something good from the ashes of what had been lost. The marshal's promise made to himself in a desert camp 70 years ago had been kept. He'd stopped running. He'd stood his ground. He'd protected the people who mattered. And in doing so, he'd found the one thing he thought he'd lost forever. He'd found home.